One of the most frequent questions I've been getting by people interested in research is, so Frederick, tell me, which type cheats the most? Well, the short answer is all types. But if you're interested in the long answer, then this lesson is going to be very interesting to you. I actually have quite some arguments in favor of the conclusion that the likelihood of someone cheating is not determined by type nor by instinct. A more interesting and more important and interesting question, however, is why do people cheat? And this is the leitmotif or the central question of this lesson. Another question is about the level of health or the level of development of people who engage in extramarital sex. Some people believe that those people must have some kind of psychological problems, and others believe this is some kind of sign of their lack of attachment. Well, I will look at this question in lesson 11, but I can now tell you already that here the answer is not entirely straightforward. But before going into detail on the motivations of non-monogamy, let's look a bit at the terminology and the wider context in which we should place this lesson. So a first term is monogamy. I spoke about the history of monogamy already in the first lesson, but here I want to give some more thoughts. First of all, we need to make a distinction between social monogamy and sexual monogamy. Social monogamy is about being married to only one person. Sexual monogamy is about having a sexual relationship with only one person. And normally the two go hand in hand, but there are some couples who are legally speaking monogamous, but they may engage in extramarital sex, so they're not sexually monogamous. And in the original sense of the word, monogamy meant having only one sexual partner during one's entire life. So very few people nowadays would be able to call themselves truly monogamous. So logically, non-monogamy can be both social or sexual. In the social or legal sense, some cultures allow a person to be married to more than one partner at the same time. And in the sexual sense, it means that one has more than one sexual relationship that overlap in time. Before moving on to the phenomena of having multiple sexual partners, let's look at another form of non-monogamy, and that's celibacy. Celibacy is the abstinence from marriage and from sexual relations, either as a conscious decision or because one doesn't find a sexual partner. Now let's leave this second reason behind and let's focus on celibacy or sexual asceticism as a conscious decision. The most common example here is that of priests, nuns, monks who take a vow of celibacy. So very often there is some kind of spiritual or religious reason for such a decision. In some cases, this may indeed come from a deep spiritual place, and it may be carried out in a very mature manner. So it would be wrong to conclude that people who voluntarily choose for celibacy have some kind of psychological problems. Because as a matter of fact, there's many cases of people who manage this sexual asceticism very well and who are able to channel the sexual energy into something completely different. However, in many other cases, people deciding to be sexually ascetic are not taking a conscious decision in the true sense of the word conscious, but they're merely suppressing their sexual desires, which are then coming out in a very unhealthy manner. For example, in the last century, the Catholic Church has been plagued by hundreds of thousands of cases of sexual abuse by priests. These people may have chosen celibacy for the right reasons, but they were not in a healthy ego state and they were not able to control their own impulses. Others may have decided to take the vow of celibacy out of a fear of their own sexuality or not being able to come to terms with them. Also here, the Catholic Church has ample of examples where priests or nuns suddenly out themselves as being homosexual. And it's not that they became homosexual while being in a monastery. They went into one because they were unable to cope with their own sexual desires and orientation. Now, of course, in the lower ranges of development, some may be unable to experience partnered sexual intercourse because of dysfunctions, and they may also be celibate. Now, sexual abstinence may also be caused by sex negative values, or it may be the result of a manipulation by a partner who refuses sex. And this is hardly ever talked about, but unilaterally invoking celibacy inside of a marriage is also a form of sexual abuse. So let's call it asexual abuse. And maybe the last thing that I want to say on celibacy is that the Enneagram can also shed some light on some reasons why somebody in the average ranges of development chooses for celibacy, or why some people may claim they can live without sex. And again, you won't be amazed to hear that each of the 9 types can have their specific motivations, most of which are linked to a sense of pseudo-spiritual superiority. 8s may decide not to have sex as an extreme choice, as a proof of their willpower, or because they know they just cannot handle their own lust. 9s may be out of touch with themselves and narcotize their needs, as they somehow subconsciously feel they wouldn't be able to manage their own sex drive. 1s may feel unworthy to have a sex life, or they may believe that it's God's will for them to be celibate. So this is the right or the appropriate thing for them to do. Some 2s may feel that they have no sexual needs and that just as some kind of saint, they can live without sex. And this lack of human needs can even give them a sense of spiritual superiority. Now, 3s may become celibate because they may feel sexually incompetent. Or in societies where the role of clergy with a vow of celibacy is seen as holding a lot of prestige, then they may also want to comply with this and become celibate. And 4s may choose for sexual celibacy in order to underline how authentic they are and how different they are from other people who just live a life of primitive pleasures. 5s are ascetic by nature and they may fear the emotional needs of the sexual partner. So they can choose for sexual asceticism in order for not having to deal with this. 6s may fear relationships. They may fear they will not manage marriage, or they may fear committing to a person, or they may fear getting kids, so they may decide not to enter into sexual relationships. Finally, 7s may understand that they go into all directions if they have too many sexual choices or opportunities. So by consciously restricting themselves, they may be able to live a more focused life without all the egocentric Epicureanism. Let's now move on to the types of non-monogamy that we may think of more automatically. Some cultures allow for a person to be married to more than one partner. And I spoke already about these forms of polygyny and polyandry in the first lesson, and I will not elaborate on this any further. What I want to focus on here is on when a married person has sex with someone outside of marriage, or what we would call extramarital sex. As such, extramarital sex can either be consensual or non-consensual. When it's consensual, it implies that both partners make a decision to open up their marriage and allow for sexual experiences with other people. Now, some people consider this a perversion and are of the opinion that higher moral standards are needed to ensure the well-being of human society. And other societies in the past, as well as some contemporary subcultures, on the contrary, claim that monogamy is not natural and it goes against evolution. So they look at this kind of consensual non-monogamy in a positive way. Now, there are interesting concepts that can explain which societies look at as favorable and why others don't. But this would go very much beyond the focus of this course and would not bring too much added value. More important is what are the consequences of consensual non-monogamy. So what about those couples who are swingers or those people who decide to open up their marriage? Well, studies say that such couples often have a higher rate of relationship satisfaction and lower rates of sexually transmittable diseases. Now, this sounds like a very interesting conclusion, so it's very important to look into detail what this really means. If you think that this conclusion means that you will increase your relationship satisfaction by opening your marriage, you're wrong. It basically means that couples who have opened their relationship or their marriage and the marriage did not collapse as a result of that, then in those cases relation satisfaction is higher than in that of other couples. And that's only logical. In order to make something like that work, the relationship has to be very strong with a lot of trust, good communication and very good boundaries. As a matter of fact, those couples who do not have a lot of trust in each other and are able to communicate or they're not able to set their boundaries well and they open their marriage, then these are very likely to see the end of their marriage. So the conclusion of the research basically says that couples with a healthy relationship who open up their marriage are likely to have a high relationship satisfaction. It definitely does not say that opening the marriage leads to relationship satisfaction. It's just that when people are in a higher ego state or in a higher level of development, they're less possessive and they will find it easier to be non-possessive. So the higher relationship satisfaction is not the result of the extramarital sex, but because of the higher level of development. So if you engage in consensual non-monogamy at a lower ego state, at a lower level of development, and based on the illusion that this will somehow magically sort out all the problems in the relationship, it's actually very likely that things may get even further out of hand. When extramarital sex is non-consensual, then we will call this cheating or adultery. And although there are no reliable figures and they definitely vary from country to country, it's clear that infidelity and cheating is a very common phenomenon in the Western world, but also beyond. And what's also common is that there is hardly any human society that approves of such behavior, and there's a good reason for it. The main difference between the consensual and non-consensual form of non-monogamy is that in cheating there is a violation of an agreement. So it often leads to a violation of trust within the relationship. And all human societies care very much about trust because it's a cornerstone for societies to survive. Now, as a result, in our society, the cheater is very often seen as a villain or a perpetrator, and the partner is seen as the victim. And although we should definitely not de-responsibilize any misdoings, this thinking is also a little bit simplistic. And for those who want to understand the dynamics of cheating and how to deal with the impact of cheating, I highly recommend you to read the books of Esther Perel, Mating and Captivity, and the second one is The State of Affairs. Although it may be very difficult, it's important not only to show compassion and empathy to the victim, but we should actually also have empathy and compassion for the cheater or for the other person in this extramarital affair. The cheater is cheating for some reason, and we'll go into more detail on this in the next videos. There's only few cases where cheating has a positive impact. As it is a violation of an agreement, it may lead to a loss of trust and often end up with the termination of the relationship. But interestingly, few couples are actually able to see the underlying reasons for the cheating and use that as a way to bring their relationship to a higher level. By seeing the cheating as a symptom for difficulties in the relationship, they may decide to finally tackle these difficulties. Now, this definitely does not make cheating advisable when you experience challenges in the relationship. There's much better ways of dealing with them. Maybe finally, also the word polyamory needs to be explained. It refers to having several romantic relationships at the same time, but with the consent of all partners involved. And in some cases, although quite rare, this may actually only be romantic or emotional without any sexual acts involved. So this is very different from many forms of extramarital sex where people only have sex but there is no emotional relationship. And before ending this video, I want to touch briefly on the folkloristic wisdom in some societies that men are by nature non-monogamous and women are not. Although this is not the core at this course, I want to briefly elaborate on this. There is zero scientific evidence for such statements. And as a matter of fact, I would even say that women are biologically even more programmed to be non-monogamous than men. Again, I won't go into detail here, but biologists have come up with arguments about concealed ovulation, the structure of the female cervix, louder copulatory vocalization, the slow build-up before achieving orgasm, and so on, all as evidence for such hypothesis. So what scientists have come up with as a more valuable conclusion is that both men and women are biologically programmed to be able to be non-monogamous. But it does not mean that we are necessarily non-monogamous by nature. And for women, there are even more arguments in favor of such conclusion than for men.